You bite your thumb at me, sir?
I do not bite my thumb at you, but I do bite my thumb, sir.
Oh, shit!
Who, what, where, why? Let's look at how you killed that guy. It's nice to meet you. Who, what, where, why? Let's look at how you did that crime. It's nice to meet you.
So,
Hello. Oh, I was gonna.
Kirby! Yeah, no, go ahead.
Hello, and welcome to Knife to Meet You, the podcast you wouldn't know was being recorded for a second time until I just told you. With me, as per usual, is Zoe. Hi, Zoe.
Hi, Brian. I'd like everyone to give a nice warm welcome to Editor Brian, who is usually on the other side of the podcast editing our sound, but he is filling in for Lobo for the foreseeable future. Lobo's okay. Just going through it, man. So, yeah. It was Editor Brian's very first episode on Knife to Meet You, like his first time, and I done goofed it up. Like, it's entirely my fault that we have to record this for a second time. So I'm very sorry if the episode is late. I'm very sorry if it doesn't sound as, like, off the cuff, because he has heard all of this already, and I just...
Yeah, we're breaking all the rules for my first appearance. It's great. You spent 4 episodes just lining up those status quo bowling pins, and here comes Brian, just boom.
It wasn't even your fault. It was mine. It was me.
Well, Zoe, I already know that we're here today. I'm going to take that again. Zoe, I already know that we're here today to talk about a man named Richard Speck.
Yeah, we are. So, little Dickie Speck, which I guess would be his rapper name. I don't know where that came from. He's generally referred to as like a mass murderer, or like, I guess you could call him a spree killer. So I'm sure those of you who are into true crime are kind of scratching your heads at this point, because not only is he not generally referred to as a serial killer, but he's also a more well-known killer, right? But I don't think y'all know what you think y'all know. I want to do a deep dive on Richard Speck here, because I think he is a serial killer. I think that we could only prove that one incident. That's the one incident that he was caught from. That's the incident that he was arrested on. And I think that if they hadn't caught him after that, I think the killings would have continued. And I want to illustrate a pattern of escalation prior to his, like, really awful fucking grand finale of murder. Because I think there were at least 2 bodies before that. For those of you who aren't familiar with Richard Speck, he is a mass murderer who systematically tortured, raped, and murdered 8 student nurses in South Chicago, Illinois, in 1966. Now, I know normally I start like with the big crime scene and, talk about that and then go from there. But I think for this episode, since we're already breaking all the rules, I think I'm going to start a little earlier in his life. Not so far back that we're already in the psychology portion, but just I'd like to start, in 1960. So like 6 years before that, and just work our way through the 6 years preceding, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, it's the way that I look at this is, because he's not normally viewed as a serial killer, this is you laying out your case.
Yeah, this is our thesis statement.
Yeah. Yep.
In our paragraph in this essay, I will prove. No, never use first person in a academic essay. But
the royal we.
I had actually laid out a whole preparatory context paragraph here about how we define serial killers and how that definition came to be. Because I always thought that the term serial killer was invented by Robert Ressler, because he's the person who introduced it into the FBI. Robert Ressler was one of the formative members of the FBI's behavioral science unit. For those of you who aren't familiar with him, I may or may not be in love with him. Anyway, so when I looked it up, it turns out I was wrong for the first time ever in my life.
It must have been that. What was that like?
It was a wild ride, start to finish, man.
I likewise have never been wrong or made a mistake, so I know the first time I fuck something up, it's gonna be devastating.
Yeah, it's gonna. I don't even. So actually, the term serial killer was first used in the English language and introduced to the law enforcement community by FBI agent Robert Ressler and Regent. Did I just say Regent?
Said Regent.
Wow. So. Second recording, already off to the races. We're just doing great here.
Voices now.
Anyway,
FBI Regent.
Regent. We're just making up words. He introduced it in 1974, but the concept and phrase was actually invented by German criminologist and director of Berlin Criminal Police, Ernst Gennet, in 1930. The more you know. In 2005, which is obviously much more recently, the FBI hosted a multidisciplinary symposium in San Antonio, Texas, that brought together like 135 experts on serial murder from like a variety of different fields and specialties, with the sole goal of identifying the commonalities of knowledge regarding serial murder. And they, as a group, settled on a definition for serial murder. That is the unlawful killing of two or more victims by the same offender or offenders in separate events. But the definition does not say what constitutes separate events. So I guess they mean like in different places and different, like, I don't know. So it's kind of still, there's a variegation in interpretation here.
Yeah.
We are contrasting this with the definition of a spree killer, who is a person or persons who commits two or more murders without a cooling off period. So I guess really the definition here is dependent on how one defines a cooling off period or how one identifies something as separate events here. Yeah. So given that he killed 8 women in one event, if that was his only situation, then yeah, spree killer. Okay. Someone who, just snaps and goes down the street fucking murdering people. Right. But
yeah,
I don't believe that it was his first murder. I don't think the killing started there. And I want to lay out my case for serial killer Richard Speck. So
I'll allow it, counselor, but you better be going somewhere with this.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, fun fact, Speck worked as a laborer for the 7-Up Bottling Company of Dallas for almost 3 years, from 1960 to 1963. Mm-hmm. And in 1961, while he was working for 7-Up, Speck met 15-year-old Shirley Annette Malone at the Texas State Fair, who became pregnant 3 weeks into dating him. And, big oof. Yeah, 15 and pregnant in 1961.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. So, obviously, they did the thing that you were expected to do back then. Shirley married Speck.
Shotgun wedding!
Yeah. You don't want to say that around Richard. He might actually bring a shotgun. So, they got married January 19th, 1962, and initially they moved in with Speck, his mother, and his sister Carolyn, and Carolyn's husband. I'll talk more about Speck's relationship and his family situation, and his relationship with his family situation, and all the things related to that situation in our psych portrait.
I think portrait's a good term for
Just
it.
please send help. So I'm gonna kind of like ignore all that contextual information because that's gonna go into a later portion. Anyway, when he got married, he started using the name Richard Franklin Speck, but prior to that, he had been Richard Franklin Lindbergh. So I'd like to start out by telling y'all about how when Speck's daughter, Robbie Lynn, was born on July 5th of 1962, his wife Shirley had no idea where Speck was. Didn't know.
He was.
Didn't show up. And the reason for that was because he was serving a 22-day jail sentence for disturbing the peace after getting into a drunk fight. Yeah.
He was getting into one of those preemptive my dad could beat up your dad fights. He's like, my little girl's gotta know.
I honestly don't think he even needed a reason, to be honest with you.
Not.
The impression that I get of young little Dicky is like basically D'Antwoord's Wat Kijk Je. It's just like, the fuck you looking at? And then, brawl ensues,
Yeah, it's the, hey, I'm walking here, but with a southern accent.
Yes. Don't ask me to do that accent.
I guess the equivalent of that would be, oh, you think you're better than me? You trying to start some shit? I swear to God, I'll go down, get Scooter, we'll run you down the mud track.
You bite your thumb at me, sir?
I do not bite my thumb at you, but I do bite my thumb, sir.
Oh, shit! This is what happens when you get two writing people together. We will recite Shakespeare at you in a thick Southern accent.
Oh my God! Hear me out. The two merchants of Gainesville.
God damn it!
It's gold, Jerry, gold.
Oh God.
So when Richard Speck's daughter was born, he was serving a 22-day jail sentence on a charge of disturbing
was
peace.
That his wife was completely unaware of. Yeah. And I would like to add that he horribly abused his wife Shirley and her mother. I read in one article that said to the point of spousal rape at knife point multiple times a day.
Yeah.
So this is not to belittle the average domestic violence is horrible enough on its own. But if you're thinking, oh, he, gets drunk and goes home and beats her up, like that's awful. That's one thing. But I'm here to tell you guys that Richard Speck just took like domestic violence and cranked it up a notch, cranked it up a few notches, cranked it up to knife point rape multiple times a day. Like I don't even, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And apparently he beat the shit out of his mother-in-law like more than once. So often enough that it ended up in one of my source materials. So I just...
Yeah, and there were like his sister-in-law and her husband were also living in the house. Like, what a horrible situation. Yeah,
like she moved in with him and his family. So I don't know how his sister and her husband and his mother were like cool with all this, but I guess that's just life at the Speck household. I don't know.
Listen, that's just the way Richard is.
Yeah.
That's just the way he's always been. Mm-hmm. You can't try to change him or nothing.
He came out the womb with a knife.
His first word was knife. He asked for an 18-inch carving knife one Christmas.
It was 17 inches, okay?
We couldn't afford it. We only could get him the 17-incher. That was the joke I was telling.
Oh God. All right. Okay. We got to catch up because no one gets that joke yet. So in 1963, Speck was caught having forged and cashed a coworker's $44 paycheck, and then having burglarized a grocery store to steal cigarettes, beer, and $3 in cash. $3.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I guess that's in back then money, but still, I mean...
Didn't he steal a ludicrous amount of cigarettes at that time, too?
Oh, no, that wasn't that time. That's another time that you're thinking of.
Oh my God. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll let you talk. I'm going to cut that.
Yeah, uh-huh.
Sorry.
He was 21 years old at that time, by the way. So if he was 21 in 1963, then when he got married in 61 to his 15-year-old wife, he was... I'm going to let you do the math, because here at Knife to Meet You, I should not be trusted to do the math ever.
I'm sorry, I was writing down that note. Could you please repeat those years one more time?
Oh, so in 1963, he was 21, which means in 1961, so 2 years earlier,
20 years old
he was 19 or 20 when he married his 15-year-old wife.
Yeah.
So that's... okay.
Not acceptable.
None of this is acceptable. None of the things that are about to come out of my mouth are in any way okay. But we're going to get through it together. So at 21, he was convicted of forgery and burglary and sentenced to 3 years in prison. But he paroled after only serving 16 months in Huntsville, Texas. Because I guess in Texas, they don't care. I don't know. Maybe it's because he's white. Who knows? Anyway, 1 week after his parole, only 1 week, seven whole days, at 2:20 a.m., January 9th, 1965, Speck is wielding a 17-inch carving knife when he attacks a woman in a parking lot of her apartment building. And she screams, he flees, the police arrive within minutes, and then shortly thereafter apprehend Speck a few blocks away. He is convicted of aggravated assault and given a 16-month sentence to run concurrently with his parole violation sentence, and he returns to prison in Huntsville. But get this. Due to a clerical error, Speck was once again released from prison just 6 months later on completion of his parole violation sentence. So he was out July 2nd, 65.
He was out again.
Mm-hmm.
I want a brief detour here, listeners. 17-inch carving knife is overkill.
Excessive.
It's very excessive. I can't... Listen, I've hosted a lot of Thanksgivings in my day. I actually, when I was in high school, I used to hold Thanksgiving 2 for my friends who didn't have like a proper Thanksgiving. We all get together at my buddy's house. I'd make a whole Thanksgiving dinner, like 12 people would come over. It was awesome. I have never in my life needed a 17-inch carving knife. A 17-inch carving knife is like the Ford F550 of carving knives. Like it's so unnecessary. It's the appendix of carving knives. You just cut it out.
Again, you shouldn't say something like that around Richard.
Well, that's
where does one even get? Where does one even get a 17-inch carving knife? Is what I want to fucking know. But I feel we've digressed. When you attack a woman in a parking lot with a 17-inch carving knife, your intent that's assault with a deadly weapon right there. Like, his intention clearly wasn't, oh yeah, she'll get away scot-free, Well,
yeah, they charged him with aggravated assault.
Yeah. But what I'm saying here is that you don't show up to a tickle fight with a 17-inch carving knife. I'm just saying the intent there is a little baked in, and I just have to say that, I can't ever speculate as to what the fuck Richard Speck was thinking at any given time in his life. That's like trying to speculate on, what speculate. I see where you, that's like trying to speculate on that guy who directed that movie and they made a movie about him and James Franco played him.
Tommy Wiseau.
Yeah, that's like trying to figure out what Tommy Wiseau was thinking at any time. Like, bold of you to even assume he was thinking, you know? And like, I just can't, I can't say like, oh, you know, he clearly was thinking XYZ thing, but I think it's safe to say, it's safe to conjecture here that, you know, if you go into a situation with a 17-inch carving knife, you're expecting to do some carving.
Yeah, exactly. You don't show up with a shovel if you're not planning to dig, you know?
That's a really good expression. Did you just make that up, or is that a thing?
No, that's just me.
Ooh, I like that.
Thank you.
Idioms by Brian.
My new
fragrance
album. I like either, honestly.
Por qué no los dos? So, okay. He gets released from prison yet again. In the immortal words of Whitesnake, here we go again. So, after his release from prison, Speck worked for 3 months as a driver for the Patterson Meat Company and had 6 accidents. That's 1 more than 5, 1 less than 7 accidents with his truck before he was fired, not for the 6 accidents, but for failing to show up for work.
Yeah. Listen, if you don't show up to work to crash my truck a 7th time, you're out of here.
Yeah, we gotta let you go. I don't know what to tell you. An argument could be made that it is a meat company. He was just trying to tenderize the product. So I just grossed myself out saying that. So in December of 1965, on the recommendation of his mother, which I like to acknowledge here that Speck apparently listens to his mother, which is just, I've got all these problems with women, but gotta listen to mom. On the recommendation of his mother, Speck, who is by then separated from Shirley, moved in with a 29-year-old divorced woman who was an ex-professional wrestler and was a bartender at his favorite bar, Ginny's Lounge, which keep an eye on Ginny's Lounge. Ginny, like from Harry Potter, Ginny's Lounge. So remember that because some other shit happens at Ginny's Lounge. But anyway, he moves in with a 29-year-old divorcee, ex-professional wrestler, bartender at Ginny's Lounge because she needed someone to babysit her 3 children, and everyone thought Richard Speck would just be a crack shot at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen.
I have young children, and I think you'd be a great influence on them.
Listen, my nephew loves knives.
All I can think of is that TikTok where the 2-year-old's running out in the yard, and his mom's like, "What do you have?" And he goes, "A knife!" And she's like, "No!" Like, that is babysitting with Richard Speck. That could be a sitcom all itself.
Ugh.
So he moves in with this 29-year-old woman. I don't ever get her name, and that is the only mention of her that we have in any of my research. So then in January of 1966, Speck's wife files for divorce, and then later that same month, in January, Speck stabs a man in a knife fight at Ginny's Lounge and was charged once again with aggravated assault, but his mother intervened. Good old mom hired a defense attorney who was able to get his charge reduced to disturbing the peace, which is a fucking huge step down from aggravated assault, given the fact that he stabbed a man in a knife fight.
No. You see, it was disturbing the piece of the man's shoulder he stabbed, and that's why it's okay.
You don't know he stabbed him in the shoulder. We have no idea where he was stabbed.
Yeah.
The sentence was reduced to a $10 fine, and then Speck fucking refused to pay the $10 fine and ended up having to be jailed for 3 days. Which was, his final time in police custody in Dallas specifically. Okay?
Okay.
So that was January. In March of 1966, Speck bought a 12-year-old car, and then the following evening burglarized a grocery store and stole 70 cartons of cigarettes, then sold them out of the trunk of said car in the grocery store's parking lot, then abandoned the car there.
My favorite. That's my absolute favorite. Listen, I got the stolen car. I got these stolen Marlboros. I'm gonna sell them. I'm gonna sell the packs out of the car. Then what do I need this stolen car for? You gotta think.
He didn't steal the car. He bought the car. He did buy the car.
You're right. He bought the car.
Right. And
That's
then the police
even
were able
worse.
to, I know, because the police were able to trace the car back to Speck because he did legitimately buy the car. So then they issued a warrant for his arrest for burglary on March 8th. And another arrest, which would have been his 42nd arrest in Dallas, would mean another prison term. So on March 9th, his sister Carolyn drove him to the Dallas bus depot where he caught a bus to his other sister Martha in Chicago, Illinois.
At what point do you just get arrested enough times? And I know like the 3 strikes you're out system, but where's like the exile threshold where it's just like you are no longer allowed in Texas, get out. Like we're not going to imprison you. We're clearly not going to imprison you because we have this one administrative assistant keeps fucking up the paperwork.
Yeah.
Oh.
The whole thing is just
it's frustrating that he was allowed to move to Chicago in the first place.
Well, I think that's where he was born in Monmouth. So, obviously his family had ties there. But yeah, it is frustrating that no one thought, "Hey, maybe let's look for him where the rest of his family is." Yeah. Like there was just, to my knowledge, no effort made there. So anyway, now we're about to see, between March and July, the ramp up, the clear escalation pattern to what some people might call mass murder, and what I think is just his like denouement. So Speck stayed with his sister Martha and her family in Chicago for a few days, and then returned to his boyhood hometown of Monmouth, where he stayed with some family friends. His brother Howard was a carpenter there and found a job for him sanding plasterboard for another carpenter. And unfortunately, he learned that his ex-wife had remarried 2 days after she was granted a divorce from him on March 16th. So he got real pissed off. He moved to a hotel in downtown Monmouth and spent most of his time in the taverns downtown. At the end of March, Speck and some Monmouth acquaintances on a bar hopping trip in Gulfport, Illinois, were detained overnight by police after Speck reportedly threatened a man in a tavern restroom with his knife. He just loves knives. He just really loves to threaten people with knives. He's all about the knives.
He's a real cut up.
Oh.
Sorry.
Boo.
We were all having a nice time, man.
I feel so attacked right now. So, okay, threatens a man in a tavern with a knife. Then, you know what? Not just in a tavern restroom, which, those things are always so cramped. And it's just like, wow, you want to be real close to this guy holding a knife. That's fun. Yeah. On April 3rd, Mrs. Virgil Harris, who was a 65-year-old Monmouth divorcee, returns to her home at 1 a.m. After a night of babysitting to find a burglar in her house brandishing, you guessed it, a knife. She describes him as a 6-foot-tall white man who was, quote, very polite and spoke very softly with a southern drawl. The man blindfolded her, tied her up, raped her, ransacked her house, and stole the $2.50 she had earned from babysitting that evening. I don't know how you can get tied up, raped, and robbed by a man and still describe him as very polite.
It goes to show how affecting he was.
Yeah, and that's going to really come into play when we talk about the nurses that he murdered in July. But I'm always really struck by the Mrs. Virgil Harris crime scene because, oh boy, he put her through hell, and she still described him as being very soft-spoken and polite. 1 week after that, Mary Kay Pierce, a 32-year-old barmaid who worked at her brother-in-law's tavern, Frank's Place, in downtown Monmouth, was last seen leaving the tavern at 12:45 a.m. on April 9th and was reported missing on April 13th. And her body was found later that day in an empty hog house behind the tavern, having died from a blow to her abdomen that ruptured her fucking liver.
Yeah, he just straight up Falcon punched her.
Yeah.
In the liver, which is, the liver's an incredibly resilient organ, right? Like, it grows back if you cut a piece off of it. Liver transplants are a thing.
Yeah.
And, you can survive with just a partial, but, like, to be able to rupture somebody's liver it's an incredible amount of force.
It's completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
Absolutely fucking ridiculous.
Yeah.
So Speck had frequented Frank's Place, and the empty hog house was one of several hog houses that he had helped to build in the preceding month. So not only was he at the scene of the crime, he helped build the scene of the crime. All right.
Yeah.
And Monmouth police briefly questioned him about Pierce's death when he showed up to collect his final carpentry paycheck on April 15th, so 2 days after they found her. And they asked him to stay in town for further questioning. But when police showed up at the hotel that he was staying at to continue their questioning, he had just vacated. Like, they found that he had left the hotel a few hours earlier carrying his suitcases and saying he was just going to the laundromat, but instead he fucking left town.
Naturally.
Yeah, a search of his room turned up a radio and costume jewelry that he had stolen from Mrs. Virgil Harris. So that tied him to the crime from April 3rd. Okay. So I honestly think that the escalation from Mrs. Virgil Harris to Mary Kay Pierce was when he finally crossed the line into killing. I firmly believe that he killed Mary Kay Pierce. And I'm going to tell you why later. You know what? No, I'm not. I'm going to tell you now. In the July murders of the nurses, one of the nurses was punched so hard it ruptured her liver. So I've never in my fucking life heard about that. I run a podcast clearly on serial killers, so I've heard of a lot of different ways that people have been injured or killed. But specifically, the punch to the liver so hard that it ruptures your liver is such a bizarre thing to do. It's so excessive in its force. It's so,
so intentional.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing that you're trying to hit from, even if somebody is just wildly flailing on somebody, they might get hit there, but it's not gonna break it.
It's a very bizarre thing to do, to do it twice.
Yeah.
To me, when he's already tied to the scene of the crime, when he repeats that same exact crime elsewhere, and we know for a fact he did that one, to me, this just says all over it, in screaming...
Pattern.
Yes. So I firmly believe he killed Mary Kay Pierce, and no one can tell me different.
Yeah.
And I would say, this was month or two before, month singular, I don't,
4 or 5 months, about.
She was last seen April 9th. So, April, May, June, July, this is 4 months, okay, before the nurses were killed. So you can't tell me there wasn't a cooling down period. You can't tell me these weren't separate events.
Yeah.
They also found items reported missing in 2 other local burglaries in the past month, but I couldn't find any other information about those burglaries.
Did he steal 130 cartons of smokes?
No. So in April 19th, Speck returned to stay at his sister Martha's second-floor apartment on the northwest side of Chicago, where she lived with her husband Gene and their 2 daughters. Martha had worked as a registered nurse in pediatrics before she was married, so there might be something there about his relationship to nurses. I don't know. Gene worked nights as a railroad switchman, and Speck told them a unbelievable story about having to leave Monmouth after refusing to sell narcotics for a crime syndicate there. Yeah, he's a real hero. So, Gene...
No, they want me to sell the drugs, but I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
I'm just not going to sell the drugs.
You can't make me.
You can't make me do it. I told him, I said, you can't make me do it.
I'll punch you in the liver. That's not funny. So Gene, who was a switchman, a railroad switchman, he had been in the U.S. Navy, had served in the Navy, and he thought that the U.S. Merchant Marine might provide a really good job for his unemployed brother-in-law. Thought it might give him some structure, you know, and seamen are generally a pretty rowdy crew, you know, so he thought that he'd get along well. So he took him on April 25th to the U.S. Coast Guard office to apply for a letter of authority to work as an apprentice seaman. And the application, thankfully, required Speck to be fingerprinted, photographed, and have a physical examination done by a physician. So now he's got fingerprints and a photograph on record, okay?
In the 60s, which is huge.
Yeah, and will become, you know, important later. So Speck found work immediately after obtaining his letter of authority, and he joined the 33-member crew of Inland Steel's Clarence B. Randall, which was a L6SB1 class bulk or lake freighter. I have no idea what any of I just said means, but I've said it to you. So he gets a job immediately, but his first trip is very brief. He was stricken with appendicitis on May 3rd. They had left on April 30th. So, like, he was there for 3 days, got appendicitis, had to be evacuated by Coast Guard helicopter to St. Joseph's Hospital in Hancock, Michigan. And he had an emergency appendectomy. After he was discharged from the hospital, he went back to his sister Martha's to recuperate. And then on May 20th, he rejoined the crew of the Clarence B. Randall. And he served with them for about a month until he got drunk and quarreled with one of the boat's officers and was put ashore on June 15th. So I just have to say, like, if you're so drunk that your fight with seamen is too much, that they have to, like, kick you off the fucking boat.
They have to ground you.
Like, I can't even imagine. I cannot even imagine.
I don't know what the last stanza of "What do you do with a drunken sailor" is, but I'm pretty sure it's something like that.
You drop him on the shore there. That was June 15th. For the following week, he stayed at the St. Elmo, which is a flop house on the east side of Chicago. And then he traveled by train to Houghton, Michigan, stayed at Douglas House to visit Judy Lacanimi. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be funny. I am genuinely trying here. A 28-year-old nurse's aide going through a divorce whom he had befriended at St. Joseph's Hospital when he had his appendectomy. So on June 27th, Judy gave him $80 to help him until he found work, and he left again to stay with his sister Martha and her family in Chicago again. And then on June 30th, his brother-in-law Gene drives him to the National Maritime Union hiring hall in the neighborhood of South Deering, Chicago, to file his paperwork for a seaman's card. The NMU, the National Maritime Hall, was 1 block east of 6 attached 2-story brick townhouses, 3 of which were occupied by South Chicago Community Hospital's senior student nurses and Filipino exchange registered nurses, 8 of whom lived in the easternmost townhouse at 2319 East 100th Street, just 150 feet from the hiring hall. Okay. So he goes there for the first time June 30th. 150 feet away are these nurses.
Yeah.
So on Friday of July 8th, Gene drives him back to pick up his seaman's card and register for a berth on a ship. He ended up losing out that day to a seaman with more seniority for a berth on the SS Flying Spray, a cargo ship bound for South Vietnam. And, you know, who knows what would have happened if he'd gotten that berth. He obviously wouldn't have had the chance to kill those 8 nurses. But I honestly think that the body count would have amassed over time anyway. So, you know, I don't know, but it's just kind of one of those weird alternate universe, you know, things where it's like, oh, what would have happened if?
Yeah. I just thought of this. It's interesting to me because his brother-in-law says, "Hey, you do really good as a seaman."
I think his brother-in-law was looking for any sort of structure to provide his brother-in-law.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is structure, yes, but also no women.
Right. And also, like, other rowdy men who will hopefully take him in stride, you know?
Or throw him in the brig and toss him ashore when he gets to be too much.
And also, I think all seamen carry a knife, you know, because of rope things, I think. Rope related.
Oh, yeah. They would have thought he's just super prepared.
So if he pulled a knife on someone, they'd be like, oh, you want to see mine? You want to compare knives? Like, let's talk about knives, you know? So, I think that he just thought that it would be a good solution to the problem of you know, Richard, Lil Dicky, being no one calls him that, just me. I just call him Actually, I just realized Lil Dicky is a rapper. He's a Jewish rapper, and I love him to pieces. And I shouldn't be calling Richard Speck Lil Dicky because I love Lil Dicky.
This is now a Lil Dicky podcast.
It is.
We're going to talk about the one he did with Snoop. That was excellent.
Oh, that was so good.
The video for that is real good too.
Yeah, professional.
Professional,
Homie,
yes.
I'm professional. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have sang far too much on this podcast episode, and we need to put a stop to it. So, okay, that was Friday. They went to. He almost got the berth on the ship, but didn't. So he went back to his sister's apartment for the weekend. By that Monday, the 11th, he'd outstayed his sister's welcome. And he packed his bags again, and Gene brought into the NMU hiring hall to await berth on another ship because they were just like, dude, I don't know where you're going to go, but you can't stay here anymore.
Right.
He stayed that evening at Pauline's rooming house, which was a mile away. Tuesday, he returned to the hiring hall and received an assignment on an oil tanker, the SS Sinclair Great Lakes, which was a 30-minute drive away in East Chicago. But when he... East Chicago, Indiana? That can't be right. Are Illinois and Indiana that close together? I don't know. What is geography? What is life?
Illinois and Indiana are pretty close together because Indiana shares its northern border with Michigan.
Okay. Anyway, he got there and found out his spot had already been taken. So he was driven back to the hiring hall, but it was closed, and he didn't have enough money for a rooming house. So he drops off his bags 6 blocks east at the Manor Shell filling station and slept in an unfinished house just off of East 103rd Street, which I would assume is 3 streets down from East 100th Street.
Yes. Yeah, reasonable. Couple blocks.
Yeah, so Wednesday, he picks up his bags, checks in at the NMU hiring hall, and is angry about having been sent to a non-existent assignment. He talked for 30 minutes in their car with his sister Martha and her ex. Oh no, and her husband Gene. I don't know why I said ex, who had driven down to visit him at 9 a.m. They were parked on East 100th Street next to Luella Elementary School. Jesus, and were across the street from the townhouses where the nurses lived. At 10:30 a.m., tired of waiting at the hiring hall for a job, and with the $25 his sister had given him, he walked 1.5 miles to check in at the Shipyard Inn, which is a Chicago rooming house. He spent the rest of the day drinking in nearby taverns before accosting at knife point Ella Mae Hooper, a 53-year-old woman who had spent the day drinking at the same taverns as Speck. So they spend the day fucking drinking together, and then he holds her at knife point, took her to his room at the Shipyard Inn, raped her, stole her gun. It was a .22 caliber revolver. And after dinner at the nearby Kay's Pilot House, Speck returned to drink at the Shipyard Inn's tavern until 10:20, when he left dressed entirely in black, armed with a pocket knife, a hunting knife, and LMA's revolver. He walked 1.5 miles on East 1, the nurse's townhouse, and got there around 11 p.m.
Right.
So it was functioning as a dormitory for several young student nurses, some of whom were Filipino. I'm going to read now from an article from the Chicago Sun-Times that was actually published in 2006. It was a Speck retrospective, like a 40 years later sort of thing. So basically, he says, "I'm not going to kill you." And of course, he says this in his, soft-spoken, polite Southern drawl. 3 of the nurses, Amarao, Gargiulo, and Passion, had ran into a closet in the bedroom and held the door shut. But one of the American nurses, reiterated, he said he's not hurt us. So the 3 Filipino nurses came out, and they saw that Nina Schmale was another nurse that lived in the building, had apparently been roused from her bedroom and was now with the others. When they asked, what do you want? He told them he just wanted money. He's going to New Orleans. So they offered him money. One by one, he let them go get their purses so that they could take the few dollars that they had. Outside the house, another nurse had just returned home from a date. She sat in the car and sang along as the radio played one of their favorite songs, "You'll Never Walk Alone." It ended shortly after 11:30 p.m., and then Davy left the car, opened the door of the townhouse, waved to Stern, and went inside. Upstairs, she went to open the door of the large second-floor bedroom, but Speck pulled it open, so she screamed because she was startled, and then he jammed a gun at her and ordered her to sit down. At this point, he took a bunch of bed sheets and began cutting them into strips with a knife, hanging the strips around his neck. He moved down the line of nurses that were sitting on the floor and tied each woman's wrists and ankles with the strips of bed sheets. At this point, one of the nurses says, "Why are you doing this? We're just student nurses." And he says, "Oh, you're a student nurse?" And he asks this with a smile, which really fucking creeps me out. I get the heebie-jeebies there, because he definitely...
He knew.
He had scoped it out. He knew exactly how many women lived there. And this is important because they happened to have a friend sleeping over. And so he miscounted how many nurses were there and left the single survivor, who was then later able to tell the police her account of what happened. This is how we know what happened. And that's how they were able to catch him. Yeah. So, he put Davy on one of the beds in the room, but left the other bound nurse sitting on the wooden floor. He kept reiterating, "Don't be afraid. I'm not going to kill you." And the women were tied up. And, I do want to interject here that the nurses' training for dealing with a hostile situation in the hospital is to just acquiesce to them. They tell them to just stay calm and do what they want. So that was their nurse training, was to just let him rob them so that he could leave and they would be fine. Yeah. And he had completely framed this thing as just, I just need money to go to New Orleans. It's going to be fine. So then he began separating them and taking one nurse out at a time. And I don't think they realized at first, they definitely did by the end, but at first, I don't think they realized that he was torturing, raping, and killing them one at a time.
Yeah.
And he was definitely cleaning himself off afterwards. He was wearing all black so they couldn't see any blood. And I think that it was just one of those things where they were too scared to do anything, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Well, and you also have language barrier possibly between the Philippines.
That's only 3 of them were Filipino. The other 5 were American.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's just of those who are in the room trying to communicate things could be difficult. It's such an intense situation. It's really impossible for me to fully imagine that,
Yeah. So when he had finished tying 7 of the women, or I guess all 7 of them, there were only 7 at the time, he then untied Pamela Wilkening's ankles and took her out of the bedroom. About 20 minutes later, which was around 12:30 a.m., nurses named Jordan and Ferris returned to the townhouse from their session bullshitting with a friend a few doors down. they ran into the bedroom where the rest of the nurses were tied up, and then Speck came in and ordered the 2 young women to follow them. He marched them out of the bedroom, and, you know, tied them up as well, I guess. Corazon Amorau heard the sound of a scuffle outside the bedroom and then the running water in the bathroom. And Speck returned to the bedroom again, untied Nina Schmale's ankles, and took her from the room. The bound nurses in the big bedroom scrambled on the floor to hide themselves behind or under the bunk beds while he was out of the room. And then when he returned, he easily found them and took them out one by one. Hiding under a bed still, Amorau occasionally heard soft screams from the other rooms. When he took Gargiulo out, Amorau heard her friend cry out in Tagalog, masikit, which is, it hurts. So she knew that he was hurting her. And then she always heard the sound of running water before Speck would return to the bedroom. The last that he took out was Davy. He raped her on the bed with Amorau crouched in her hiding spot under a bed across the room.
Oh, holy
like,
shit.
Yeah, just praying and listening to the bed springs creaking.
Oh.
Yeah, then he took her from the room and continued his assault on the couch downstairs for some reason. So she was alone for a little bit, and she was able to crawl on her stomach to hide under another bed that had a blanket hanging over the side. So she was hoping that it would obscure her even more from vision if he checked. Yeah. And about 45 minutes after he left the room, he returned and dumped out the remaining coins from the women's purses and then left. And the reason he left was because he had counted that he had killed 8 women. He knew 8 women lived in the house. And so he didn't take into account that they had someone sleeping over. And so Amorau was left alive. And she stayed curled under the bed for more than 90 minutes until she heard the alarm clock go off at 5 a.m. of one of her roommates. Yeah. At 5 o'clock, she started working to free her wrists and then untied her ankles just as a second alarm went off at 5:30. She looked around really cautiously. She was so terrified he was going to come back at any minute or that he wasn't really gone. Then she walked out of the bedroom and there was a trail of bodies. This poor woman, only 23 years old, she went to her own bedroom where the bodies of Wilkening, Ferris, and Jordan lay on the floor. She climbed to her top bunk, opened a window, and just screamed, and eventually pushed the screen out and climbed stand on the ledge overhanging the front door. And she was just screaming, "Help, help, everyone is dead on the sampan but me," which is the Tagalog word for a houseboat, which is, you know, the common reference to homes of many Philippine Islanders. In a neighboring townhouse, Ellen Stanish was already up when she heard the house phone ring, and someone on the other end reported that there was a woman outside crying. So Stanish went out, and she knew Amorau. She was one of her classmates.
Yeah.
So she goes out, and Amorau says they're all dead. Her screams woke up another nurse, another student nurse by the name of Domzalski, who remembers, "I believe it was 6 minutes to 6 to be precise. Nobody could believe or understand what had happened." So when they first heard that all of the women were dead, Domzalski said that she and another student nurses in the neighboring townhouses assumed that an air conditioner had leaked toxic fumes or something, because like they couldn't think of any other reason other than like gas leak how all 8 of these women could be fucking dead at the same time. We tried coming up with a logical explanation if they were all dead, Domzalski said. Everyone was shocked. Things like this just didn't happen. So, obviously they called the police. Detective Jack Walenda was the first to show up on the scene. He had never seen anything like what he's seen in the townhouse. First, he saw the body of a nude woman on a downstairs couch. Walking upstairs, he saw another body sprawled on the bathroom floor. In one bedroom, the 3 women, and another 3 more. It was just one after another, Walenda said. You're wondering what the hell happened here.
Right.
Pat Matusik, said Walenda, who lived nearby, her father used to own a tavern at 108th in Michigan. And I'd go there once in a while with my father-in-law, to buy some drinks. And of course, I saw little Patty running around with her little sister Betty Jo in the tavern. I got to know her. So he actually knew one of the victims, which is...
Oh.
Yeah. The women had all been stabbed or strangled, some both. Ferris had been stabbed 18 times and then strangled with a white nurse's stocking. Others had the strips of bedsheet that had been used to tie them up knotted around their necks. And Matusik had been strangled and kicked in the abdomen. Gargiulo was strangled so hard her neck was dislocated, and Passion's throat had been slit. The whole thing is just way overkill. There's no fucking need for any of that.
No, it's not just it's brutalization.
Yeah. Nina Schmel's fiance was driving to his job at a silk screen printing plant in West Suburban Addison. When he heard the initial reports on the radio, he immediately turned around and drove back to the home where he lived with his parents and told his mother. And his mother called Schmel's parents, and then, they were all just staring at walls together, waiting for news about what had happened. They were thinking about graduation and graduation parties and, all of this stuff. And it just really, what destroys me as someone who has spent her life perpetually in school is that these women were, just about done with school. They were almost there. They were almost at graduation.
Yeah.
Good for the world. It absolutely fucking kills me, all of the surviving nurses that were living in the other townhouses are all fucking terrified for their lives, and
imagine being a freshman, just moved
no
in.
one understood immediately what had happened. There were rumors flying around that it was a former patient or a former boyfriend. No one knew why they were selected. And Domzalski says, we were part of the same group, so we all felt threatened.
Yeah.
Then came the funerals. You had all these friends who died. They all knew each other. They were friends with each other, and you had to choose which funerals to go to because some were an hour or two apart. Bonzek said, if all of your friends die at the same time, how do you pick? Absolutely just gut-wrenching.
Yeah. Violence on campuses is always, for me, a little more horrifying. Again, 'cause, I've spent so much of my time at school, in school. Man.
Yeah. So the lone survivor was Corazon Piazza Amaral. She declined requests for an interview, so I have only, kind of stories about her, nothing from her directly. She was only 23 years old. She was a Filipino exchange student, and she gave the police and prosecutors an eyewitness account that led to Speck's capture and imprisonment. Not only that, but she also pointed him out she testified in the trial. This girl was absolutely just
a real badass, yeah.
Yeah, Chicago Daily News reporter M.W. Newman called 4'10" Amaral, quote, a blend of steel and lace. Which is Fine. Yeah. By the way, A Blend of Steel and Lace is going to be the first song we do as the Knife to Meet You cover band. We're going to do Fleetwood Mac's Leather and Lace, but Steel and Lace. It's going to be great.
It.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to come up with parody songs for each of these episodes.
I'm kidding. We're not going to do any of that. I do want to do a final accounting of the victims. Pamela Lee Wilkening, only 20 years old. Marianne Jordan, 20. Suzanne Bridget Ferris, 21. Mina Jo Schmale, 24. Patricia Ann Matusik, 22. Gloria Jean Davy, 22. Valentina P. Passion. Sometimes I see it spelled Pison, but I think that might have been a typo. I'm not sure. Only 23 years old. and Merlita Ornedo Gargiulo, 23.
Kids, basically.
Yeah. Schmale was a devout Christian who saw nursing as her calling. Matuzik enjoyed antiquing with her sister. Wilkening liked to watch her older brother race cars. Passion hoped to bring her family to the United States. 4 of the nurses were engaged, and one of them had tacked a newspaper headline to a bulletin board in the townhouse reading, "Here Comes Tomorrow." Jack Wilkening said they were about ready to do a world of good. They were ready to go out and do what they had been taught to do, and probably do a very good job at it. Yeah. That's really horrible shit. I'm not really going to go into detail about their final wounds. I did describe some of it, but I'm not going to go into any more detail than that. I did want to point out, though, that Pat Matuzik's liver was ruptured.
Yeah.
So, Lieutenant Emil Geiss headed the identification section of the Chicago Police Department, and he compared and identified a smudged fingerprint that was found at the murder scene to another provided by the FBI, which belonged to Richard Speck. Sergeant Hugh Granahan assisted with the comparison, and later that morning, near exam, J. Burke found a better fingerprint on a door at the scene. So they did have leads from there. But 2 days after the murder, Speck was identified by a drifter named Claude Lunsford. Shout out to Claude.
Claude.
Speck, Lunsford, and another man had been drinking on the evening of July 15th on the fire escape of the Star Hotel. And then on July 16th, so the day after, recognized a sketch of the murderer in the evening paper and phoned the police at 9:30 p.m. after finding Speck in his room at the Star Hotel. So the police didn't respond to the call, even though their records showed that it had been made. Speck, however, thought that because Claude Lunsford had made that call, that, like, this was it, he was caught. So he attempted suicide, and the Star Hotel desk clerk phoned in the emergency around midnight. Speck was taken to the Cook County Hospital 12:30 a.m. on July 17th. At the hospital, Speck was recognized by Dr. Leroy Smith, a 25-year-old surgical resident physician who had read about his tattoo that said "Born to Raise Hell" in a newspaper story, and only then were the police called and Speck arrested.
Of course. I mean, that's a for the age that we're in, like when this is taking place, it's amazing that all of those things were able to happen. You know, the people knew about his tattoo, that they could report,
Corazon had given them, the description that they had made the sketch from that was in the newspaper. She had told them about his tattoos. So they had all this information only because of the bravery of Corazon Amaral.
Shoot, you're right. So then the fingerprinting really
It hadn't come through yet, yeah. It would have taken them weeks more to figure out what was going on, tracking down all this shit.
Oh, you're right. They do manual identification at that point.
Yeah, and even then, after they had arrested him at the hospital, the Miranda case that had vacated the convictions of a number of criminals that created the Miranda rights law, where you have to read your rights to the person, had caused enough concerns that Speck was not even questioned for 3 weeks after his arrest.
Holy shit! So they just detained him for 3 weeks and just don't say nothing to him. Wow.
That is correct.
Wow.
So I need to take a quick break before we move on to the pretrial. And all of the shenanigans that happened in the trial, because it's just a million degrees in here.
Yeah,
so 100%. We'll be right back, listeners.
Welcome back to Knife to Meet You. We are just about to finish up the historical bits about Richard Speck, so he's going to tell us a little bit about his trial. And we're going to learn a bit more about him from there. Zoe, take it away, please.
Thank you. So, felony court judge Herbert J. Passion appointed an impartial panel to report on Speck's competence to stand trial and his sanity at the time of the crime. The panel comprised 3 physicians suggested by the defense, 3 physicians selected by the prosecution, 5 psychiatrists, and 1 general surgeon, and a partridge and a pear tree. The panel's confidential report deemed Speck competent to stand trial and concluded that he had not been insane at the time of the murders. Okay.
Well, this is 1960s definition of what insanity means, so I don't know
Well,
if that's...
what you have to understand about psychopathy is that psychopaths aren't crazy. Like,
Right.
they are operating within reality. They are able to come to logical conclusions following, logistic syllogisms,
Yep.
It's just that they don't possess human empathy. So the things that guide their decisions, the things that guide our decisions do not guide their decisions, I should say. So
Right,
you can have a
because
conversation with them and they'll seem perfectly fucking sane. The only difference is that they think it's totally okay to hurt, maim, or kill somebody for shits and giggles or for any real reason,
without reason, even,
Yeah.
on a whim.
For their own personal enjoyment.
Right.
So, while awaiting trial, Speck participated in twice-weekly sessions with the part-time Cook County Jail psychiatrist named Dr. Marvin Ziporin. And these sessions continued after Speck's transfer from Cermak Memorial Hospital, which was inside Chicago's House of Corrections, until the day before Speck was transferred to Peoria to stand trial in February 13th of 1967.
Okay.
Ziporin prepared a discharge summary that listed depression, anxiety, guilt, and shame among Speck's emotions, but also a deep love for his family. It went on to note an obsessive-compulsive personality and a, quote, Madonna-prostitute, unquote, attitude towards women. Ziporin maintained that Speck viewed women as saintly until he felt betrayed by them for some reason, after which hostility developed. He also diagnosed organic brain syndrome resulting from the cerebral injuries suffered earlier in Speck's life, and stated that he was competent to stand trial but was insane at the time of the crime due to the effects of alcohol and drug use on his organic brain syndrome. So that's a very interesting thing because
it's an organic brain syndrome. It's not something you hear very often.
Actually, let me pull this up.
Sure.
Cut this real quick.
Mm-hmm.
My computer is so fucking slow. Yeah, so organic brain syndrome is defined as a state of diffuse cerebral dysfunction associated with a disturbance in the consciousness, cognition, mood, affect, and behavior in the absence of drugs, infection, or a metabolic cause. So if you just look up the basic definition for organic brain syndrome, Dr. Ziporin's own evaluation makes no sense. Because to say that, he was insane at the time of the crime due to the effects of his alcohol and drug use on his organic brain syndrome, it's like organic brain syndrome is, I don't know, whatever. I do want to say, though, that after his death, they did study his brain, and I do talk about that later on, but there is definite physical formality issues in his brain with the way his brain was formed that definitely would have had an effect on his behavior. So
Right.
this is all very interesting in that, cerebral injuries could have had a huge effect on Speck. And this is a pattern that I see a lot and one that other crime YouTubers have mentioned, podcasters, whoever else does true crime stuff has also commented on the the word just went out of my head. Help me out here. On the commonality of having brain injuries in killers.
Right.
So Ziporyn did not testify for the defense or the prosecution because both sides were troubled to learn that before the trial, Ziporyn was writing a book about Speck for financial personal gain.
The conflictist of interest.
Yeah. He also pissed off the Cook County Jail, who fired him as its part-time psychiatrist the week after Speck's trial ended. At some point during his interviews with Speck, Ziporyn had obtained a written 3-sentence consent from Speck authorizing him to tell, quote, "what I am really like," unquote. And his biography of Speck was published in summer 1967. So that same year.
Yeah. So we haven't even gotten to his trial yet, and there's already a book about him.
No, he published it in the summer. The trial started February.
Oh, okay. I see.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But before he started the trial, he was already writing the book.
Right, yeah, very true. Ziporyn was already diving at this with two talons, you know? But
this isn't a podcast about Ziporyn or how much we fucking hate him. So Speck
it is
later...
now. Format change, baby.
Speck later claimed that he had no recollection of the murders, but he had confessed the crime to Dr. Leroy Smith while at the Cook County Hospital. He later also recounted the crimes while in prison, so we know that that's not true. But Dr. Smith would not testify because the confession was made while Speck was sedated. And I don't think that this is even like a legal precedent. I think that he personally said that he didn't feel comfortable giving that, because I know even as recently as 1985, the confession of Cinnamon Brown was used against her, even though she had been severely drugged and sedated and was in the process of fucking dying when she gave her confession.
And there's still people today who get interrogated when they are they're intoxicated of their own.
Yeah. Not in their right mind.
And they just
and the confessions used against them.
Yeah.
So I think that personally was a really fucked up choice for that doctor to make, because, but whatever. The Illinois Supreme Court Justice John J. Stamos, who was Cook County's state attorney when Speck was tried, knew about the hospital confession and stated, quote, "We didn't need it. We had an eyewitness." So, he confessed to the murders for the first time in public when he spoke to Chicago Tribune columnist Bob Greene in 1978. And then in a film that the inmates made at the Stateville Correctional Center in 1988, he recounted what happened, but we'll get to that. So the trial began April 3rd, 1967 in Peoria, with a gag order on the press. In the court, Speck was dramatically identified by the sole surviving student nurse, Cora Amorau. When Amorau was asked if she could identify the killer of fellow students, Amorau rose from her seat in the witness box, walked directly in front of Speck and pointed her finger at him, nearly touching him, and said, "This is the man."
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, get it, girl. I'd like to take a small aside here to talk about our Lord and Savior, Corazon Amorau, who has since married. Her married name was Atienza. And just say that according to a Chicago Tribune article from 2016, that Corazon Amorau Atienza has moved on with her life and wants to be happy every day. She's doing very well, said William Martin, 79, the former assistant state's attorney who was the lead prosecutor in the case. She laughs a lot, he said. He's remained in contact with her all of these years. I want to also add that despite the horror of what happened, Amorau Atienza carries warm memories of her friends, that she did go on to become a nurse, and that she retired 5 years before the article, after many years as an intensive care nurse in Washington, D.C., and that she now spends most of her time with her husband, Alberto, her daughter, Abigail, her son, Christian, and her 6 grandchildren.
Well, that good for her.
I know.
Very happy for Corazon.
Cora's the shit. I really, like, anyone who's ever been abused knows that even talking about their abuser is hard. Standing in the same room as their abuser is difficult. This woman was fucking made of steel. Oh, I love her.
Steel and lace.
God bless. God bless. So there was her witness testimony, her identification, and then Lieutenant Emil Geis testified regarding the fingerprints, which were matched, and provided the scientific evidence that the prosecution needed for the conviction alongside Amarao's testimony. So, obviously it placed everything beyond a reasonable doubt. And on April 15th, after only 49 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Speck guilty and recommended the death penalty. On June 5th, Judge Herbert J. Passion sentenced Speck to die in the electric chair, but granted an immediate stay pending automatic appeal to the Illinois Supreme Court, who then upheld his conviction and death sentence on November 22nd of 68. So, okay, he was convicted, he was sentenced. Then something completely different happened.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So I'm going to try and keep this as like to the point and to the facts as possible, but it's kind of difficult to understand. So if I don't make sense, please ask follow-up questions. In December of 1965 and March of 1966, a publication called Nature and another publication called The Lancet published the first preliminary reports by British cytogeneticist Patricia Jacobs and her colleagues of a chromosome survey of Scotland's only security hospital for the developmentally disabled, in which she stated that they found 9 patients averaging almost 6 foot in height, 5'7" to 6'2", had a 47th XYY karyotype. So this is like a chromosome in their genetic strand. I don't know much about genes outside of, making like a Punnett square or something. And she mischaracterized these men as aggressive and violent criminals. Okay. So that came out in December 65, March 66, and then in August of 66, based on those mischaracterizations, a Swiss endocrinologist and geneticist at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, named Eric Engel, wrote to Richard Speck's attorney, the Cook County Public Defender Gerald W. Getty, who was reportedly at the time planning of all those physicians, concluded that Speck was mentally competent to stand trial. So he got a secret, confidential karyotype of Speck's genetics done that showed he was normal. Okay.
He didn't have this,
and he received those results.
He didn't have this abnormality that this UK researcher had noticed.
Well, not only had she mischaracterized what she had found, so her research was wrong, but, then Getty, Speck's attorney, got the genetic, karyotyping done for Speck, and he didn't even have it. So, it wouldn't have mattered if he did, because the research was wrong, but he didn't have it to begin with, is the point. And he knew this back in September. So in January of 68, Getty contacted the original Mary Telfer, the biochemist at at the Elwyn Institute, for more information on her findings, and she not only incorrectly assumed that Speck was an XYY male, but leapt to the egregiously false conclusion that he was the archetypal XYY male. So, in April of 1968, the New York Times introduced the XYY genetic condition to the general public for the first time, using Telfer as the main source for a 3-part series on consecutive days that began a Sunday front page story. And in the second story of the series, it was basically, quote, ultimate Speck appeal may cite a genetic defect. It was incorrectly reported that a chromosome analysis of Speck by Chicago geneticist Eugene Pergament in the summer of 1967 had shown Speck to be an XYY male. Not true.
Right.
And then the third story in the series included a denial by Pergament that he had done a chromosome analysis of Speck, but continued to incorrectly report that a chromosome analysis had shown Speck to be an XYY male. So he was like, oh, I'm not the one who did the analysis, but someone else's analysis showed it. Which, again, not fucking true.
Listen, there's this one lie, but here's a double lie.
Right. So the following week, a Time magazine article using Telfer as the main source reported that, quote, Richard Speck is said to be one such man, referring to the 2 Y chromosomes. And then a Newsweek article using Telfer as the main source reported that, according to some doctors, Speck exemplifies the XYY type, and that his chromosomes have in fact been analyzed, but his lawyer will not reveal the results of the test. It took on a life of its own. As you can see, these are top-notch reporting sources. These are unbiased, peer-reviewed sources coming out with this information.
And they just have it wrong.
Yeah.
It's just wrong.
Yeah, and in May of 1968, after reading these news stories, the guy who had originally contacted Getty and learned that the news stories were false, he was just dumbfounded. He performed a second chromosome analysis just to make sure, and it again showed that Speck had a normal 46XY karyotype, which, again, reported to Getty in a July 3rd, 1968 letter, 3 weeks before Getty filed his 193-page brief in Speck's appeal to the Illinois Supreme Court. So 3 weeks before he filed this brief, he had a second set of results from the same scientist who was saying, this is wrong. This is not correct.
He's like, I'm going to put that in the main
I'm going to file it anyway.
Right.
Yeah. So that's fucking illegal.
Yeah.
And then in November of 1968, 5 days before the Illinois Supreme Court made its decision on Speck's appeal, a Sunday front page article in the Chicago Tribune that again used Telfer as a main source reported that prison records showed that blood samples that were taken from Speck in Statesville Prison in June of 1968 to determine whether he was an XYY male, and that Getty had confirmed that this chromosomal analysis had been performed outside of Illinois, but refused to disclose the results. I don't think that sentence made sense grammatically, but you get the gist of it. Basically, 5 days before the Supreme Court is making a huge decision about Speck's appeal, there's a Sunday front page article saying that, blood samples were taken, analysis was done, Getty confirmed.
Yeah.
So then on November 25th of 1968, 3 days after the Supreme Court upheld Speck's conviction and death sentence, Getty held a press conference at which he outlined the basis of his forthcoming appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court and made public the chromosome analysis results from Engel, showing Speck to have a normal 46XY karyotype. So I don't understand what the fuck he was trying to prove, because having a press conference where he outlines the basis of another appeal to the Supreme Court and then making public the fact that the whole basis of his first appeal had no basis in fact, what you doing, Getty? What you doing?
What is he trying to do? Because it's obviously false, right?
I don't think that it was, though. Because in September of 1972, Engel published his account of the story and a photograph of Speck's normal 46XY karyotype. But by then, the false association of Speck with the XYY genetic condition had been, introduced into high school biology textbooks, college genetics textbooks and medical school psychiatry textbooks, where misinformation persisted for decades later. So, like, this was the scientific standard that was taught in schools. That's how widely prevalent this misinformation was.
That's scary.
Yeah.
Man.
So, in June of 1971, the U.S. Supreme Court, citing their decision in Witherspoon v. Illinois, upheld Speck's conviction but reversed his death sentence because more than 250 potential jurors were unconstitutionally excluded from Speck's jury because of their conscientious or religious scruples against capital punishment, which is also highly fucking illegal. So much illegal shit going on. Yeah. So the case was remanded back to the Illinois Supreme Court for resentencing. And then that was in 71. And then in June of 72, in a separate case, Furman v. Georgia, the U.S. Supreme Court declared that the death penalty was unconstitutional. So the Illinois Supreme Court's only option was to reorder Speck to be resentenced to prison by the original Cook County Court. So on November 21st of 1972 in Peoria, Judge Richard Fitzgerald finally resentenced Speck. He sentenced him to 400 to 1,200 years in prison because of 8 consecutive sentences of 50 to 150 years. He was denied parole in 7 minutes at his first parole hearing in 76, and at 6 subsequent hearings in 77, 78, 81, 84, 87, and 1990. He kept trying, though. Kept trying.
You gotta appreciate a little bit of stick-to-itiveness, I guess. Like,
right? It's that tenacity, you know?
You don't become the Texas liver puncher.
I honestly just...
Fuck this guy. Like...
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, while incarcerated at the Stateville Correctional Center in Crest Hill, Illinois, Speck was given the nickname Birdman, after the film Birdman of Alcatraz, because he kept a pair of sparrows that had flown into his cell. He was described as a loner who kept a stamp collection and enjoyed listening to music, neither of which I knew one could do in prison, but all right. His contacts with the warden included requests for new shirts, a radio, and other mundane items. And the warden merely described him as, quote, a big nothing doing time. He was not a model prisoner. He was often caught with drugs or distilled moonshine, and punishments for these infractions never stopped him. Quote, how am I going to get in trouble? I'm here for 1,200 years, unquote.
Yeah, well, what are they going to do? Lock me up again? Like, you're already in prison for...
Ever.
Yeah, until the 31st century.
Right. Speck customarily refused all media requests, but granted one prison interview to Bob Greene in 1978, because Speck told Greene that he read Greene's column in the Chicago Tribune. In this interview, Speck confessed to the murders for the first time publicly and said he thought that he would get out of the prison between now and the year 2000, at which time he hoped to run his own grocery store business.
So he can rob it. So he can steal his own smokes.
Yeah. Uh-huh. He told Greene that one of his pleasures in prison was getting high, and when Greene asked him if he compared himself to celebrity killers like John Dillinger, Speck replied, "Me, I'm not like John Dillinger or anybody else. I'm freakish." It's a direct quote.
Piece of shit.
Speck said that when he killed the nurses, he, quote, had no feelings, but things had changed. Quote, I had no feelings at all that night. They said there was blood all over the place. I can't remember. It felt like nothing. I'm sorry as hell for those girls and for their families and for me. If I had to do it over again, it would be a simple house burglary. Which is obviously just him being, like, upset that he was caught.
Yeah, no, he's... I'm sorry as hell.
Yeah.
Wait, no, bullshit. Get out of here, bud.
Yeah, his, quote, final thought for the American people, quote, was, just tell them to keep up their hatred for me. I know it keeps up their morale, and I don't know what I'd do without it.
Thinks pretty highly of himself. The American people, A, knows who he is, and
they did, though. This was an international sensation at the time. It had
okay.
news lines everywhere. Everyone knew who Richard Speck was. 1967 and 68, you know?
Okay.
But I do want to say that they say in this, and actually in multiple sources, that he refused all media requests, which may be true, but he did interview with the behavioral science unit, which is why he's actually mentioned in Mindhunter, the show that's about, it's a fictionalized version of the development of the behavioral science unit of the FBI, which eventually became the behavioral analysis unit that started criminal profiling.
Yeah.
They did interview him.
Okay.
And I do believe that he killed one of his sparrows in that interview just to make a point.
Holy shit.
Yeah. One account says that he snapped the bird's neck in his hand. Another account says that he threw it into a fan, like a yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Yeah. I had forgotten to include that in our first recording, so
Yeah, I didn't.
second recording for the win.
Shit.
Yeah. Okay, so then in May of 1996, a Chicago television news anchor, Bill Curtis, received some videotapes from an anonymous attorney that had been, the tapes had been made at Stateville Prison in 1988. And he showed them publicly for the first time before a shocked and deeply angry Illinois state legislature. Curtis pointed out the explicit scenes of sex, drug use, and money being passed around by prisoners who seemingly had no fear of being caught. And in the center of the videos was Speck performing oral sex on another inmate, sharing a huge pile of cocaine with another inmate, parading in silk panties, and sporting female-like breasts that were allegedly grown using smuggled hormone treatments, as well as boasting, quote, "If they only knew how much fun I was having, they'd turn me loose." Yup. So the Illinois legislature packed the auditorium to view the 2-hour-long video footage, but stopped the screening at the point which Speck started giving a blowjob to another inmate.
Yeah, reasonable.
But in another scene from behind the camera, a prisoner asked Speck why he killed the nurses. Speck shrugged and jokingly said, "It just wasn't their night." Asked about how he felt about himself in the years since, he said, "Like I always felt, had no feeling. If you're asking me if I felt sorry, no." He also described in detail the experience of strangling someone. He said, "It's not like TV. It takes over 3 minutes and you have to have a lot of strength." Which is like, you have to also remember that the surviving family members of the women who were killed, for example, John Schmale, the brother of Nina Schmale, said it was a very painful experience watching him tell other people about how he killed my sister. So this is just really horrible. Portions of the tapes were broadcast on the A&E Network's investigative reports, and the same airing included interviews with people who believed that Speck was not taking hormones or wearing panties voluntarily, and that he instead was being forced to do this by other inmates, and that this was just his way of surviving his time in prison. I don't know.
He said he was having fun.
He could have been saying that, for a number of reasons. I don't know.
Yeah.
In any case, Speck died of a heart attack at 6:05 a.m. December 5th of 1991, which was one day before his 50th birthday. He died at Silver Cross Hospital in Joliet. He had been taken to Silver Cross after complaining of chest pains and nausea. And after Speck's death, Dr. Jan E. Liestma, a neuropathologist at the Chicago Institute of Neurosurgery, performed an autopsy of Speck's brain and found apparent gross abnormalities. 2 areas of the brain, the hippocampus, which involves memory, and the amygdala, which deals with rage and other strong emotions, encroached upon each other, and their boundaries were blurred. He made tissue section slides and presented them to other specialists who agreed that these findings were highly unusual, but there was no further analysis done because the tissue samples were either lost or stolen when sent to a Boston neurologist for further study, and Liestma's own findings were generally inconclusive. Dr. John R. Hughes, a neurologist and time director of the epilepsy clinic at the University of Illinois College of Medicine, and a colleague of Liestma, examined photos of the tissue in the 1990s. Brainwave tests on Speck in the 1960s. He stated, "I have never heard of that type of abnormality in the history of neurology. So any abnormality that exceptional has got to have an exceptional consequence." So Hughes attributes Speck's homicidal nature to a combination of the brain abnormalities and the violence Speck suffered at the hands of his alcoholic stepfather and his own, drinking and violence in Texas. And just, obviously the organic brain dysfunction or whatever that, his earlier psychologist had referred to.
Yeah.
There was obviously organic reasons for his brain to be the way that it was. After Speck died, his body was not claimed, and the Will County coroner, when Speck died, Dwayne Krieger, said that he talked to Richard Speck's sister, and she said that they were afraid people would desecrate the grave if they had him buried. So he was cremated, and the ashes were scattered in a location known only to Krieger, his chief deputy, a pastoral worker, and Joliet Herald news columnist John Whiteside, who since died. All witnesses swore to keep the location secret and have only described it as a, quote, pastoral and appropriate location in the Joliet area. I guess they said a couple of prayers and then spread his ashes to the wind, and that was it. So that is the absolutely insane motherfucking case of Richard Speck. And we haven't even gotten to the psychology. I recommend we take another quick break. Those of you who do not like the psychology profile section of the show can go ahead and skip to the next episode, or if you're all caught up, maybe go have a drink of water, stay hydrated.
Or if you're all caught up, you can email us a question or any other things you'd like to let us know at ktmypodcast@gmail.com. You can find our website at ktmypodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter at ktmypod. And you can find us on Spotify, Stitch Fix, Google Podcasts, as well as our Facebook page, facebook.com/ktmypodcast.
Did you say Spotify? Because we're on Spotify too.
We are on Spotify, everybody. Nice to meet you.
Are we still waiting on Apple? We're still waiting on Apple?
We're still waiting on Apple. I'll tell you about Apple later.
All
Everyone, shake your fists in the air at Apple for me. Just real quick. Send me some of that Goku energy, and hopefully we can get this fixed.
We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the show for our final segment, the armchair psychology portion of the show, where Zoe and I are going to go through and ruthlessly judge Richard Speck on his many, many crimes.
Richard Benjamin Speck was born in the village of Kirkwood, 6 miles southwest of Monmouth in west central Illinois. I'm sure I've been mispronouncing Monmouth this entire time, and we're going to get so many people writing in like, no, you're wrong. You're probably right.
Listeners, please do write in to tell us we're wrong in the nicest way you can think of. I want it to be a creative challenge. Think of how nicely you can tell us we mispronounce things.
Barbershop quartet. I'm just throwing things out there. Yeah.
Singing telegram.
Oh boy. Speck was the 7th of 8 children. His parents were Benjamin Franklin Speck and Mary Margaret Carbow Speck, and the family moved to Monmouth shortly after Speck's birth. Speck and his younger sister Carolyn, who was born in 1943, were much younger than their 4 older sisters and 2 older brothers. Although Speck's oldest brother Robert died unfortunately at the age of 23 in an automobile accident in 1952. Speck's father had worked as a packer at the Western Stoneware in Monmouth, and before that had worked as a farmer and as a logger. Speck was apparently very close to his father, and unfortunately his father died in 1947 from a heart attack at the age of 53, when Speck was only 6 years old.
So just big, gigantic trauma right out the gate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a couple years later, Speck's super religious, teetotaling mother apparently met and fell in love with a traveling insurance salesman from Texas named Carl August Rudolph Lindbergh, whom she met on a train to Chicago. Lindbergh was hard drinking and peg-legged. Interesting fact. He had a 25-year criminal record that started with forgery and included several arrests for drunk driving, which was, in every respect, the complete opposite of Speck's sober, hardworking biological father, who he had been very, very close to. So this must have been, after only a couple years after his father died, marrying like his anti-father must have been also very troubling.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Speck's mother married Lindbergh on May 10th of 1950 in Palo Pinto, Texas. And Speck and his younger sister Carolyn stayed with their married sister Sarah Thornton in Monmouth for a few months so that Speck could finish second grade. I'm sorry, I'm backing up here. Sarah Thornton? Because Martha's last name is also Thornton. Did they marry brothers? I have no follow-up. I have no other, I've got one source for his childhood, and this is it. So that's interesting. Okay, anyway.
Name?
I don't know. Sarah, what are the odds that two of his sisters would marry two separate men with the last name Thornton who are unrelated to one another, that both live in Monmouth, which is, I don't think, a very big town. So, I don't know. Maybe two sisters married two brothers. That could be cute. Maybe they had a double wedding. Oh, okay. Sorry, we're getting real off track here. Anyway, he stayed with Sarah for a few months so that he could finish the second grade before they joined their mother and Lindbergh in rural Santo, Texas, which was 40 miles west of Fort Worth. And that's where Speck attended the third grade. Okay. So after a year in Santo, Speck moved in with his mother, stepfather, and sister Carolyn they all moved together, not moved in. They moved to East Dallas, Texas. They lived at 10 addresses in poor neighborhoods over the next dozen years. That's like one move a year.
Yeah, that's a lot of change. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or even multiple moves in the same year. I mean, we're, on that short of a timeline.
Yeah. Speck apparently loathed his often drunk and frequently absent stepfather, who psychologically abused him with insults and threats. Speck was a poor student because he needed reading glasses, but refused to wear them. And he struggled through Dallas public schools from the 4th to the 8th grade. He actually repeated the 8th grade at J.L. Long Junior High School, in part because he refused to recite in class due to a lifelong fear of people staring at him. In autumn of 1957, Speck started 9th grade at Crozier Technical High School, but he failed every subject and didn't return for the second semester. So he dropped out just after his 16th birthday. Speck had begun drinking alcohol at age 12, and by age 15 was getting drunk almost every day. His first arrest was in 1955 at the age of 13 for trespassing, and was followed by dozens of other arrests for misdemeanors over the next 8 years.
Cool.
So I've got really no information 15 and 20 when he marries Shirley, which is, kind of where we started at the beginning of our episode. But that is the information that we have about his childhood. Again, I don't have enough information to do the McDonald triad in this episode, so we're going to skip over that. But yeah, we've got brain issues, we've got head trauma, we've got a huge emotional trauma at a very young age. Then that's duplicated by a couple years, later, his mom remarrying and all the moving around. Being poor and being humiliated and being, all this shit. It's a lot of upheaval in his formative years. So you can really see how this is all leading up to a kind of inevitable conclusion here.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's really unfortunate. I wonder if perhaps his father hadn't died, if he would have been a very different person. There's another alternative universe.
Yeah.
But yeah, do you want to go through the PCLR?
Yes, let's go through Ayers Psychopathy Checklist Revised.
So under glib and superficial charm, I don't see him as being charming, but the fact that he was able to somehow like almost like fairy glamour his way like into calming people down. The fact that everyone described him as being so polite and soft spoken, he put everyone at ease. There's something to that that's almost it's like a creepy superpower, and I don't like it.
Yeah, it's a type of charm. It's not necessarily the charm that you think of.
Yeah,
but
it's not glib, it's not charismatic, but there is a charm there, and I think it deserves 2 points.
Yeah, being able to put people at ease is a manipulative skill if used for those purposes.
And it was.
Yep.
A grandiose estimation of self. I mean, you said so earlier about just when he was talking about in prison about, America's loathing for him, keeping him going.
Yeah.
He's just, I don't know.
I don't see, this is one of those ones where it's hard for me, because on the one hand I want to give it to him because that's a nutso thing to say, but it's almost
a guy.
Yeah, he likes it.
I don't know that. I don't know that. He's at least pretending to.
Yeah.
I think that he. You know what? I don't think I have a follow-up to that. I don't know. My initial thought was maybe he's trying to keep up a reputation in prison because that's where he's going to be living for the next 1,200 years. But I could be wrong. It might not have anything to do about his reputation and trying to keep that maintained in his, small, closed circuit society that he's living in. I don't know. Especially when you look at the interviews that he did with the BS, but I'm only recalling these from memory. I didn't have them in front of me, and I didn't look them up when I did the research because I already had so much material. Yeah. I mean, the first half of our episode's probably like an hour and a half, so we should probably pick our shit up. Anyway, he seems that he wants to be viewed in a very certain way, and I think that for him is power and control.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
Which may not necessarily be narcissism, but it is certainly an extension of that.
Yeah, it is certainly something that you would associate with narcissism.
So I think there's at least a 1 in that category.
I think a 1 is fair. Yeah, I think given what we have to work with, I think a 1 is probably very fair.
So that brings us to 3. Under need for stimulation, I mean, he did a lot of shit, but I don't necessarily see anything that was in my research that specifically stated that he was like constantly had to be involved in something, doing something all the time, something, because he was constantly bored. I do think that there's something to be said for pathological lying, though.
Yeah.
I think that's a 2. I think lack of remorse or guilt's a 2.
Oh, yeah, higher if we could, for sure.
Yeah. So that's, that's 4 plus the 3 from earlier, 7.
We're at 7, yeah.
Yeah. Callousness and lack of empathy. I don't think you could do the things he did if he had something like empathy going on there. So I think.
Well, yeah, and he said over and over he felt nothing. He still feels nothing.
Yeah.
It was.
It's also part of that shallow affect, the callousness, lack of empathy, all of that together.
Yeah.
So, parasitic lifestyle. That's a 2. He didn't ever have his own place.
He was couch surfing off of his family, and
a lot of the time when he got a hotel room or a flop house room, he did it using money he'd taken from his sister or from his lover, or whoever.
Yeah.
So, poor behavioral controls. Did someone say bar fight? Because I heard bar fight.
I mean, even going back to when he was a kid, he was drinking at 12. He was getting drunk every day at 15. It's all there.
Yeah. I don't really think there's any evidence of over sexual promiscuity except for the fact that he was constantly fucking raping people.
Yeah, but that's not. He wasn't cheating on his wife. Yeah, he wasn't cheating on his wife. He was raping people.
Yeah. Early behavioral problems.
Big 2.
Yeah. Lack of realistic long-term goals. Big 2.
Big 2. Yeah, he didn't have nothing going on. He took jobs because his family said you should do this. Okay.
Yep. Impulsivity, irresponsibility. Yeah, I don't think he paid a bill in his life.
He pulled, like, a woman in a shopping center just pissed him off and he pulled out a knife.
Yep.
Like in a parking lot.
Yeah. No, that was in the parking lot of her own apartment complex. That wasn't in a store parking lot.
Oh, you know what?
I believe he probably just saw that woman and just decided, I don't know.
This woman has wronged me.
Who the fuck knows? Again, Tommy Wiseau,
Yeah.
Failure to accept responsibility for own actions. Spent years pretending not to remember what had happened.
Yeah.
Many short-term marital relationships. No, he only had the one.
Yeah.
Definitely had juvenile delinquency, revocation of conditional release, and criminal versatility, though. That's an easy 6 right there.
Yeah. No, he did all of those in spades.
Yes. So what does that bring us to?
We are currently at 27.
Whew. Well, we know that over 20 is, most non-lethal criminals score 20 or above. Usually 30 to 40 is the cusp. But I'm not sure if we added up everything from the beginning, right?
Okay.
Glib and superficial charm, we did a 2.
Yep.
Grandiose was 1. Needs stimulation is 0. Pathological lying, I think, was that a 1 or a 2?
That was a 2.
All right. Cunning and manipulativeness was also a 2.
Yep.
Lack of remorse or guilt was a 2.
Yep.
Shallow affect, 2.
Yep.
Callousness, 2.
Yep.
Parasitic lifestyle, 2.
Yep.
Poor behavioral controls, 2.
Mm-hmm.
Sexual promiscuity, 0.
Yep.
Early behavioral problems, 2. Lack of realistic long-term goals, also 2. Impulsivity, 2. Irresponsibility, 2. Failure to accept responsibility for own actions, 2. Many short-term marital relationships, 0. And then a 2 for the last 3.
Oh, okay. Nope, that is on me. I did bad math. We are actually at 33, not 27.
Oof, well.
So he crossed that boundary by a third.
Yes. So there we go. Definitely a psychopath.
Well, he's definitely dead.
But yeah, that's Richard Speck.
Wow. What a piece of shit.
Right? And I would be interested to know if you guys would leave comments to let me know if you feel that I proved my thesis statement that he is a serial killer.
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
If you felt convinced, I'd like to know. If you felt that that my argument was lacking, I'd like to know why.
State your counterclaim before the bench counselor.
But be nice about it, please. Spent a lot of time compiling all of this.
Yes, well, we respect decorum in this courtroom.
We do. All right, Judge Brian, why don't you lead us out?
Listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this journey through learning about Richard Speck. As always, you can find us on Twitter at KTMYpod, on Facebook at facebook.com/KTMYpodcast, and you can always send us an email at ktmypodcast@gmail.com. Until next week, listeners, have a great week, and it was a knife to meet you.
Bye!
Bye!
What, where,